Welcome to the Josh Hall Web Design Show. Helping you build better websites and create a web design business that gives you freedom and a lifestyle you love.
Hey friends, welcome into the podcast. This is episode 118. And in this one, we are going to have as much fun as we possibly can when it comes to talking about a subject that is not so fun, but it's very, very important as a web designer, and that is email. We're going to talk about email deliverability. And if you're curious about what that term actually means, maybe you're new to web design, let me pose this scenario to you. Let's say you build a website, you launch it, it goes live, but you're not getting any submissions through your contact form. But you go into your website, whether you're using the native contact form with Divi or Elementor or whatever theme you're using, or maybe Gravity Forms, which is what I use, and you see you're getting a bunch of submissions, but they're not actually getting through to your email. That is a massive problem. It's very, very common. And I'm excited in this episode to share the solution with you. Well, there's numerous solutions, but we are going to talk about how to practically help you out with email deliverability and how to get your emails from your website through to you or your client's email. For this topic, I brought in my personal guru, my personal expert with all things email, domain, DNS, and basically anything on the internet. This is my man, Amr. He's been on the show before. He was on episode 51. We talked about his journey going full-time to web design during COVID. And this guy is the wealth of knowledge when it comes to email in particular. He's really good at a lot of things, but email is his specialty. And if you can believe it, he actually likes it. He actually likes working with email, which was my personal, the worst part of what I did as a freelance web designer for years. So this is a really, really important episode, and I cannot wait to help you with the ins and outs of getting your emails through. We do get into some nitty-gritty stuff here, so heads up, this is a technical episode, but I can't tell you and I can't stress the importance of this because you've at least got to know the basics, and that's what you're going to be empowered with here. We are going to cover the basics, and we're also going to get into some more advanced ways to make sure you get your emails through. So I am personally super excited to share this with you because this is the podcast episode I really needed to hear years ago. And one thing I do want to say before we dive in, Amr, at the time of releasing this interview, just recently came out with his first online course about email and about how to get it through. And it goes like, if you like this podcast episode and you really want the next level, make sure to join his course. It goes through everything in so much more detail. I do have a link and a special discount for Josh Hall Web Design Show listeners on the show notes for this page. Go to joshhall.co/118 and there'll be a special discount for you, and you can check out Amr's course if you feel good about this episode and want to take the next step. Now, additionally, before we dive in, what we talk about in this episode is specific to email, but email is all connected with whatever hosting company you're on. It's also connected with a variety of things in regards to your domain and everything. So if you're terrified with domains and hosting and DNS and cPanel and MX records and A records and all this stuff, another great resource for you to help you with all this stuff is my cPanel course. It's a quick, down and dirty, no nonsense, very quick course that will give you the foundation of all this scary stuff. So after this episode and after you go through Amr's course, if you want to learn the basics of all that good stuff, I would love to help you out with that. You can join my cPanel course today. There's a link for that in the show notes for this episode as well. And without further ado, here's my man Amr. We're going to have as much fun as we can talking email. Amr, my man, welcome back to the show, dude. Great to have you back on.
Hey, Josh, how's it going?
Well, I've got a little bit of hair left after working with you, coincidentally enough, on some email issues I was having on my site. I mean, we were joking. The timing of this could not have been more comedic because today we had scheduled to talk about email deliverability and to help people make sure their emails are going from their websites to the inbox. And of course, it's the funnest topic to talk about ever in web design. But in all seriousness, it's super important. So we had planned on talking about this, and literally the day before, I had some email issues, and you came to the rescue, and we literally just fixed it right before we went live on this call. So the timing is perfect. Super excited to talk with you about this because we're essentially going to have a conversation that normally you and I would just have, but I figure, hey, why not share it with the world? Because this stuff, again, it's not sexy, it's not fun, but by golly, it's important. And even for those of us who are not technical wizards, we need to understand the basics. And Amr, you're the man. You're my go-to guy. All my students and my web design club, everyone just loves you. They've realized that you are the guy. For those who don't know you, can you refresh everybody where you're based out of and what you do?
Okay, guys, I'm Amr. My nickname is the Internet Guy. We'll get into that a bit later. And also, close friends call me the plumber, the website plumber. So that's another nickname. It's because my first name is hard to pronounce. I'm based in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. We have no snow, so we're quite lucky, but we don't see the sun as much. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there. And yeah, I worked for, corporate America for a long time, for software companies and stuff like that. And from 2016, I started my boutique web design and development company. I don't know, I don't like the word agency much. So it's not an agency, it's a company. And I'm following Josh's steps and all the guidance as well that you Josh, give, and all the business stories of how you grew your company and how you sold it and what you're doing right now. And like this, I'm following these steps, even though I'm a little bit older than you.
Well, you're doing a great job, man. You killed it. Our last podcast was about your story going full time, and I've seen you just kill it, and I love it. I'm so pumped for what you're doing, and you're such a helpful guy, man. And you're just a wealth of knowledge, and particularly when it comes to anything domain, DNS, email related. You've been my dude for a while, so it's been a pleasure to expose you to the community, and I love that everyone's finding out just how valuable this set of skill set is, because it's hard to find people who know this stuff, more importantly like it. So let's dive into it. We're going to have as much fun as we can talking about email. We want to make this fun for everyone listening, but again, it's super important. So let's start out, man, with what is email deliverability, particularly for those who might be just getting into web design. It's likely they're not even thinking about this. Like I didn't. Yeah. When I started building websites, I just figured you had a contact form, then it goes to your email. I had no idea that there was this shady term called email deliverability. So what is that? And maybe we can segue into talking about the issues that WordPress often has with that.
Sure. To answer your question, we got to go back in time when the internet was new, and email was the sexiest application that worked on the internet. And I don't know, I don't have the statistics in front of me, like the number of emails that get sent worldwide per day. I'm sure you can Google it, but it was the most important application of the time. And you're talking maybe 1995, 1996. We had no fast internet. There was nothing there, no streaming. There was most of what was on were websites with just text and a few images. They weren't even as good looking as they are today. And email, that's it. Like people were online just to send email because it replaced the older method of written communication, which was fax machines. So because that was so important, it's built on the protocols of the internet. And I'm sorry if I sound a little bit geeky here, but it's like you'll be hearing lots of abbreviation terms like POP and IMAP and SMTP, which is something they usually do when you're setting up your new email on your phone or something. And then you get the port number and SSL. Do I need TLS or SSL? And it's like it becomes a little bit like, I don't know, too daunting of a task just to set up an email to work on your phone.
Yeah, it feels like you're learning a foreign language while you're trying to get email set up.
But it's still very important. So fast forward to today, we have Netflix, we have everything on demand, we order food online, we use social media, we interact with each other, we use Zoom, but we still use email. We just don't talk about it anymore. Like, it's not the sexiest app alive, but it's extremely important. Like, if you're locked out of your social media, you use email to reset your password, right? So it's still very important.
That's an interesting way to think about it. I like that. It's almost like it's it's like an ancient tool almost in technical terms and technology, but it's still like the most important. And it's obviously huge for even just email lists and connecting with customers.
You can't sign up to anything without an email. If you're doing any sort of nourishing to, your subscribers and people who follow you, you put them on a newsletter and you send them emails, right? And in most cases, these, if you do it right, they work. Like people click, get to see more information, and if they like it, they buy whatever you're offering. So, and when you have discounts and the whole lot, right? So email lists are still a big thing as well. And email deliverability is about not losing any of this. Like it's for every message to be delivered straight to the mailbox of the person who's intended to get that message. So for this email deliverability, there are so many factors that actually affect the ability of your message to reach its destination. Mm-hmm. And as we go on today during this interview, we'll shed some lights on, bits and pieces and what is spam and things like that.
Yeah, I want to ask about SMTP and POP and IMAP and spam, but let's start out. I think maybe a little more practical topic would be WordPress in general. It seems to be an issue, and I'm speaking as a web designer of over 10 years. When you set up a WordPress website in particular, which basically everyone who listens to this is doing, again, you would think a contact form, no matter what theme you're using, would just, you get the email, but often, more cases than not, it doesn't go through. So what is the issue here? What is WordPress? So, we realized we got a website, we got a contact form, whether it's in a theme or a plugin, and then it should go to your email. But what's the issue? I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate because I know, but I want to ask you, Amr, to the layman who's just getting started, what's the issue? Why doesn't that work on demand?
So your WordPress website sits on top of the hosting, which is on your hosting account, right? And your hosting account has an IP address. And most of us use shared hosting. So this IP address is used by everybody else on the same server, right? And what normally tends to happen is WordPress, as you know, is built on top of is built with a programming language called PHP. And PHP itself has a function. It's called PHP mail. This function in the code of the PHP is the function that's responsible to send those emails from your website to wherever it's going. The problem is that it's also sitting on that server with that IP that you probably have another 100 people using at the same time. So it's not that reliable. Like if you just use PHP mail, it can have delays. Like the message would eventually arrive, like maybe 90% of the time, but it could arrive tomorrow or next week or whatever. Like and it also depends on what host you're using. Like if you're not using like a top-notch hosting company, they'll be having a lot of spam going on. They'll be having a lot of traffic, of like bad traffic getting out of their servers.
Yeah.
And this will negatively affect your email deliverability. So that's one of the reasons we don't recommend anyone to use out of the box the PHP mail function, which is, whatever is built in. Like if you don't take anything, if you just install WordPress, build a form and leave it, and you don't do anything else, you'll be using the PHP mail function.
That's a good way to phrase it and to think about it. So it's good for me to even hear that practically, just the fact that a WordPress website on shared hosting is going to have the same IP as a lot of other websites. Yeah. So it's going to cause issues. A lot of email platforms are going to look at it like it's spam or it's not going to let it through. So let's actually, before we get into spam and SMTP and stuff, let's talk about email addresses. I meant email on a hosting server versus Gmail. Yeah. Why is something like Gmail going to get through more often than not than a hosting server type of email?
So as we've just mentioned, because you're using the IP address, which is shared between you and so many people, if anybody on that server sends even one spam message or one message that maybe wasn't spam, but the user, the recipient, didn't like it. So, especially now in your Gmail, when you receive an email, you could just go and say, this is spam, like you designate it as spam. And this goes back all the way, traced to the IP address. Then that IP address gets blacklisted. So there is, I don't know how many there are, but like previously we had 5 spam blacklists in the world that control email deliverability. One was called Spamhose, and there's like many of them. But that's not the point. Like there are a lot of spam blacklists, and what gets blacklisted is not your email, it's your IP address. That's the problem. That's exactly the problem. Because many people come and say, I never spam. I don't send anything. Like, I don't even have a newsletter or anything. I don't have a mailing list. Well, it's not you. It's somebody using that IP address. And, God forbids if not you getting hacked, but somebody, your neighbor on that server has bad security on their WordPress, and they get hacked. And then somebody's using their PHP email function to send thousands of emails. Yeah. Your IP is blacklisted.
That's so wild. You could be an innocent person trying to do good, and you could get screwed over because somebody's spamming. Else. Yeah. So what about like Gmail versus email on a server?
Gmail and like Microsoft Office, which has Outlook and so on, they build a specific email application that's like Gmail, for example. The only job it does is send and receive mail. It doesn't do anything else. No one is sharing it. And they have thousands of servers around the world that are responsible for these transactions to route emails and receive emails and filter them and stuff. So because it's specifically built for that purpose, it's way more reliable as an email tool than anything else.
Gotcha.
And it's not that expensive when you think of it. It's like, what, $5 a month or something?
Yeah, for people who are like, oh, are you kidding me? Is your email not worth $5 a month? That's nuts. That's crazy to not understand the value of that until, because look, I've had clients that have been like, I don't want to sign up for G Suite if it's going to be like $60 a year. I'm just going to put the email on my server because I have hosting, but they don't understand this. And this is what I didn't understand in the beginning either. And I had to let them know, if you do your email on the server, first of all, I'm not touching it. And second of all, you're going to get spam, you're going to have a lot of problems with spam, and that's just the way it works. And I like how you're making this very clear for us. It's that email providers like Gmail or Microsoft Office 3 or whatever, all these different email specific platforms are just for that. But email on a server, that server could be used for a website. It could be for document storage. It could be for all sorts of things. So it's just like a part of, what's on the plate of products with that.
Don't just think as well about you. If you're on shared hosting, you've got neighbors that you don't know about. You don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So, you don't even know if they're doing something that's eating up your resources. Or I know that hosting companies have safeguards in place so that if somebody's eating up a lot of resources, it doesn't affect the next person. But unfortunately, that doesn't work for email because email uses IP addresses. And that's the other thing. Like that, no matter what you do, there's no going around that IP address thing unless you change your IP address.
Gotcha.
If you're on a hosting server where you have your own dedicated IP, you may get away with having email hosted where the website is hosted, but you got to ask your hosting company to verify whether your dedicated IP is also used for email.
Oh, okay.
So is it only for the website, or is it website and anything else?
What about private VPNs? Do those help? Or
the VPSs? Yeah. If you have a VPS on your own, but again, see, VPS, the V means virtual, right? So basically a VPS is like a server, like the hardware itself of the server, and inside the server, you distribute it or you break it down into 10 virtual servers. So now you have this one big thing that has its own IP with the connectivity to the outside world. And then inside it, you have 10 other sub-server machines or virtual servers that have their own IPs as well. And the networking between them determines where everything is going and where everything is coming. And that gets a little bit too complicated, because if the main IP of the big one gets blacklisted, then nothing's going to get out as well.
Yeah. No, I actually, so that's good. I was curious about what a VPS was, but also VPNs, like personal networks.
Yeah,
do those
the VPNs. No, not really. Because I also think VPNs can contribute to spam as well.
Okay.
Because you're hiding your real IP address, and you appear as if you're somewhere else, right? Now, many of the email authentication services online, they're set up to pick this up and figure out, oh, hang on a second, that's a VPN. That's not a real, a real IP. So it
looks like a mask almost.
Yeah, unless you're running your own, it's because even your VPN, they give you servers in different cities, right? So you can appear in London, or you can appear in Brisbane, or whatever. But many other people are using that same VPN service like you. So that's not your own IP, it's still shared.
Okay, gotcha. It's like a more expensive shared IP, basically, or like a premium IP. Okay, that makes sense. Let's talk about, while we're on the subject of what's happening with a lot of these issues, let's talk about spam. We are going to get to the good stuff. We're talking about the solutions next, but let's wrap up with the problems here by talking about spam and how spam filters work. I mean, you've covered a lot of that so far, just with platforms, seeing different IPs and how they filter out spammy IPs, or if a website got hacked, they'll likely block that IP. But what about spam in general, between just email to email or email through website? How do email clients look at spam, and what's the issue? What's going on there?
So most of the email clients, before getting the email to your inbox, automatically they check online spam blacklists. And if the email, the from, is on an IP address that's on that list, they just discard the message. It's not going to get there. If it doesn't look like it's an algorithm, and it's very complicated. So it's got like some weights, and it's like a point system. So it's almost like to make it easier. Let's say we have 10 points. Anything above 5 will be discarded. If you're like 4 or 5, they're not sure, is it spam, is it not spam? It may come to your inbox, but in the spam folder.
Okay.
And then if it's between 0 and 2 or 0 and 3, it looks legitimate. So it will come to your inbox. And that's why sometimes you send an email to somebody, it ends up in the spam folder, even though that email is not spam.
Right.
But some spam filter there is not sure. Is it a yes or a no? If it's a definite yes and they're sure it's spam, it's never going to get there.
Yeah. And how do we alleviate that? If there's a email that we know we should be getting, but it keeps on going to spam, what can we do to receive that? And then I guess on the flip side, I'm sure what we'll get into will help that from stopping.
So let's make the difference between sending and receiving.
Okay.
You control the sending part. So you need to make sure that, again, like what we were saying earlier, if you're using an email, which is hosted on your hosting where your website is, expect that some of your emails will not end up where they're supposed to be. That's normal. There's nothing you can do about it, apart from moving to G Suite or Microsoft or something similar, right? But if you're still using that, make sure you don't spam, of course. Make sure you use authentication. So whatever you're using to send has to be secured, like with similar to the SSL certificate that we put on our website. The same certificate can also be used to send secure email. So you contribute to making sure your sending environment is safe, right? You can't affect your neighbors if you have a bad one. It all goes out.
But we can do all we can to make our emails send safely and legitimately.
So now receiving, you have no control, because the sender is the person who's got the control.
Right.
I know it's annoying. The only thing you can do is to whitelist them through your own email, application, whatever you use. If it's Gmail, you can just add them as a contact, and that whitelist the sender.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
again,
I was
if
actually
the
that
same
was
sender,
one.
yeah.
That was one question I had: is what is for folks who are new to this, and I didn't know for a long time what whitelist meant. How would you explain that? And just like you
So
said,
I'll give you an example. My website, when somebody fills the form, the email comes from WordPress@domain.com. I probably was too lazy. I didn't put like a proper,
didn't put the plumber at
like
internet,
plumber
yeah.
at domain.com. But so it comes, let's say my website is it's humantalents.ca. So it comes from WordPress@humantalents.ca. I actually don't have an email address called WordPress@humantalents.ca. So the first time someone fills the form, it ends up in my spam folder because that email actually does not exist. WordPress just created something in order to get this message sent out. So all what I need to do on my Gmail, I just add WordPress@humantalents.ca as a contact. Previously, there was something in the settings that says whitelist or whatever.
Yeah, I was going to say, wasn't
it's
that
not there
option?
anymore. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't see it anymore. I think the fact that you designate it as a contact, it means you want to receive emails from this address.
I'm glad you clarified that because I have an email right now that comes through that keeps on going to my junk, and I wanted to do just that. I wanted to whitelist them, and I was actually perfect time to ask you. I didn't realize making them a contact could alleviate that.
But see, one of my websites, no matter what I do, keeps going to spam. And that email is hosted. It's not an important one. It's a website I use for testing.
Okay.
Right. But eventually some people find the form there and fill it. Usually it's a question, like I get 90% spam, 10% real questions out of that testing site. And because it was testing, I didn't really spend much time on it. So it's hosted on the hosting and it's using PHP email function. And, I just left it alone.
Yeah.
Right?
Basically everything you said not to do for like a legit business.
And I've
right?
whitelisted it like 100 times. And then tomorrow the message is in my spam folder again.
Oh, okay.
So it's like, there's nothing I can do apart from move the email system outside the hosting server.
Interesting case study right there. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of the issues, a lot of what's going on. One thing I wanted to mention, I meant to mention this a little bit ago. You talked about blacklists when websites are blacklisted and their domains are blacklisted. This is something I experienced with websites that got hacked when clients wouldn't go with my maintenance plan and they got hacked eventually. And then all of a sudden, not only was their website down, but they were really confused because their email wasn't getting through. And I let them know
the
your
whole
domain,
IP is blacklisted.
The whole IP.
Yeah.
So just for everyone listening, if your clients are neglecting to sign up for security in your maintenance plan, let them know it can be their entire, not only website, but their email as well. Everything that's hooked in there together. And this is obviously typically the problem when email is on a server. So if you have your website on Bluehost and you have your email on Bluehost and it gets hacked, guess what's going to happen? That whole IP is going to be blacklisted and your website's going to be down. Your email's not going to come through. So just wanted to make that differentiation before we move on.
Think of an IP address like an address. So if you have a house in your neighborhood where people are always drunk and they have parties and they're very loud, right? The police is going to be here all the time.
It's like a campus. Your email is basically a campus frat house.
So exactly.
There we go. You know what? That's the best way to explain this.
So that's the IP address for you. The IP address has a problem. Everybody there will suffer.
And then once something really goes down, then your IP becomes the drug house or something. So that's the best way to articulate.
There are ways actually you can remove. So you can request the removal of an IP address from the blacklist. Yeah. But it takes a few days. So
yes, so I use security.
Who's going to live for 10 days with no email, no orders coming through the website, nothing.
Right. I've used security for email and website malware removals and stuff, which they do help, but it does take time. And some of these processes we've already talked about and are going to cover, you'll have to do over and over once you kind of rebound from that. Because it's kind of like, it's like me living in a bad neighborhood and then the drug house, they get evicted, but it's going to take a little while for that property to rebound. But you're still in that neighborhood. Yeah,
still in that neighborhood. So we need to prove yourself.
We need to move out of this neighborhood. So let's talk about look, we're making it practical now. We're having some fun. How do we move out of that email neighborhood, Amr?
So first thing is your email has to be sent from another IP address. So use a dedicated email service. And Okay, there's a third one that people don't know about, which is cheaper. So you've got Google and Microsoft. They're pretty much the same. I think it's $5 per user per month, or if you pay annually, you get a little bit of a discount. Let's say 60 annual to make it easier. Microsoft is quite similar, but Microsoft, so if you're using Microsoft software anyway, yeah.
Real quick, when you say Gmail, you're talking G Suite, not just because standard
G Suite,
Gmail
not
is
the
free,
free
but G Suite.
Gmail. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you want to use your domain as your, like, you want to move email at mydomain.com, not,
Yes.
not my personal at Gmail. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
You move it out of your hosting and it will be hosted on G Suite, but it's still your domain name and your business name. So it's not any different. And we set it up this way, of course. But Microsoft as well, like, for example, on many cases, I have advised people to move to Microsoft 365 rather than move to G Suite because they're already using. So, for example, many of the small businesses, like the between 1 and 20 employees, are already using Microsoft Outlook as their email application of choice. So if you're already using Outlook, Microsoft Word, and PowerPoint, and you're in a Windows environment, it makes more sense for you that your email be hosted by Microsoft because everything is in the same place. And when you're paying for your software, when you're paying for your, the suite itself, the Microsoft Office suite, it comes with email. So you don't have to pay extra to host. You just bring your domain. That's it. That's the only thing. You port your domain, and we'll make it easier just in a second. Just let us finish that. Because what does my domain mean, and how can I have my website somewhere and my email somewhere else?
Yeah, it's confusing it's confusing in general. So for clients, they're like, what? For me, the way I like to explain it is, for clients, you want to have your email with Gmail because of the deliverability and the security, and you just have a lot more options and space. You don't have to worry about space getting filled up like you would on a server.
Exactly, yeah.
And I would always tell them, you don't want, your name at Gmail because it doesn't look professional.
Doesn't look good,
and it does, there's a lot of other aspects to that. Whereas if you do G Suite, you can still have your full domain name. You can have, you can have your name at your website, but it's actually going through Gmail. It's just the professional, the upgrade version. So that's kind of how I explain it. But yeah, there's the step I'd like to talk about is some of these tools for that. There's SendGrid. There's a bunch of plugins I want to talk about. Maybe even before we talk about some of these tools we can use, because those are important whether you're using G Suite or Microsoft. It doesn't matter. You still need a third party to go from WordPress to a good email. So maybe let's talk about what SMTP is and why that's important.
So SMTP is Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. It's responsible for the email going out. And in the past, again, if I'm mentioning the PHP mailer function, that was because when they built this into PHP as a programming language, that was a great thing to do because they allowed people to send messages straight from any website, even before WordPress was created, right? But the problem is that you have one line of code that can be hacked, or like even if somebody just knows your specific function, where is it? And they know your IP address, which is not hard to find, they can send massive emails, spam emails from your IP without you knowing. So because of that specific thing, most hosting providers and almost everybody had to bring in an extra layer of security, which is SMTP authentication. So in the past, you didn't need to do this. You just put the name of the SMTP server or the IP address, and that's it. All the mail goes out, nothing. Now you still have to put your username and password. So you need the server name or the server IP address. There's a specific port number. Usually SMTP uses port 25. You don't need to worry about that. It's usually written, like when you create the first email on a specific server, they give you this information anyway.
Yeah.
And then you have to put your username and your password. So any message that uses that specific way of sending email is authenticated as you. They know it's coming from you. You can't claim, hey, I've been, like if you're, if you code sending spam, you can say it wasn't me because it's authenticated, unless of course you were hacked.
And this is all for outgoing, like from WordPress, right? This is contact
for outgoing
forms,
anywhere, even
orders,
your Gmail, even your actual personal
gotcha.
myname@gmail.com. Yeah. When you send a message using Gmail, you are actually using Gmail's SMTP server.
Okay.
You just don't know it because it happens in the background. So
that's the question with WordPress I want to transition to is a lot of people will just upload an SMTP plugin thinking that will do the trick. Sometimes it does, and you have a really good resource for that. But so I've used SendGrid, which for anyone who's brand new to all this, SendGrid is basically the easiest way I like to think about it is when a message comes through WordPress, whether it's my contact form or an order or anything on my website, in order for it to get to me, to my Gmail, it goes through SendGrid. SendGrid basically authenticates it. And the issue that we had, Amr, before we went live was I had an issue with SendGrid bouncing my main email. So I wasn't getting my emails there for a hot minute. So that's, we figured it out, but by the way, the solution was just to make sure my email address wasn't on the list for getting bounced, and then we were good to go. But there are some other tools that are very similar. So can you make that differentiation for us, Amr, between SendGrid and some of these other SMTP, plugins? And then maybe let's talk about the one that you recommend.
Sure. So the first thing is that, like, your first line of defense. Move your email outside. Move your email outside your hosting. If you need help with that, just call me. We'll figure it out together. But once you've had that, so let's say you're on G Suite or in your Microsoft or somewhere else, not on your hosting. The next thing is to tell WordPress which SMTP server to use. So you download a plugin and you install it, and then you have to put in your account details, like, again, the server name, port number, and your username and password. And this should actually route anything that comes out of your WordPress website through your new email server, which is not on the same hosting. Mm-hmm. So the first thing is you can use just a regular SMTP. So username, password, bang. Now, SendGrid, there are other tools that are actually specialized in email deliverability, like no email gets lost. And let me take your case as an example. When we went to the SendGrid dashboard, we could see why it wasn't sent. So even if the email doesn't get there, SendGrid itself will show you what the problem is so that you can fix it. So you've got some other tools. There's SendGrid, there's Sendinblue, there is one called MailPoet, and I'm sure there's many more. I think even Amazon AWS, they have something called SES email service. And these are just services. Basically, they give you SMTP capability.
It's kind of like the mailman, right? It's like a really good mailman, a real good mailman. They're going to make sure, that mailman is going to make sure, all right, your website just had a contact form. Let's get this message and let's make sure it goes to the right house, not the drug house, this house.
And let's make sure you're not spamming anyone. So if you start doing something, or if your website is hacked and someone is trying to use it to send mass email, it will get stopped at SendGrid or whatever tool you're using. And basically, it's just it's just an SMTP service. So you rented or bought yourself an extra SMTP service. So you're no longer using your regular SMTP mail from your G Suite.
I meant to ask really quick too, where the step before this, setting up the SMTP stuff, can you do that through WordPress for everyone's reference? Can you do that through
you need
server?
a plugin. Yeah, you need a plugin. I mean, unless you want to go and code something in the PHP function file, which I don't advise anyone to touch.
And that's it.
Just use
just
a plugin.
just a simple SMTP plugin? Because I'll link this in the show notes.
Yeah. So everybody used to use a plugin called WP-SMTP before. The problem it didn't get hacked, but they had like a security problem. They fixed it already, but in the 2 or the 1 day when they had the problem, 30,000 sites were infected with malware as a result. So that's the only reason why I wasn't recommending WP-SMTP. I use something else called Postman. I think it's called WP Post. And the reason why I like it is because it keeps the log for me. So any email message that has gone or that has not gone but was supposed to go shows on the log, and then you can open and figure out why is it not going, what's the problem. It tells you.
And I'll make sure to link that in the show notes. Yeah, it's post SMTP, mailer and email log. Now, a question for you, Amr, can you just use that to go right to the email, or do you need SendGrid alongside that, or one or the other?
So the plugin gives you the option. It gives you the option to choose whether you want to use your G Suite or Gmail to send directly. In that case, you don't need SendGrid. It will be like you using Gmail on Gmail. Mm-hmm. So WordPress will behave as you. Like your website will be you sitting there sending the email, but it will just happen automatically. Or you can use it with SendGrid and a couple of other services. It doesn't have all the services there, but it does have Gmail, any SMTP. So if your email is still on your hosting server and you still didn't move it,
that's still the problem. Yeah.
You can use that SMTP with the plugin as well if you wanted to, and SendGrid and a couple of other services.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. Because I was curious about that as far as the options for it to be separate from SendGrid or alongside. It sounds like it kind of depends on what you want to do. Obviously, it would be good for most everybody with client sites to have a standard. I just always use SendGrid, and then what we would do is we would just set up that website in SendGrid. It kicks out a particular API. We just use the SendGrid plugin for WordPress, which, as we talked about before we went live, the only issue with that is it hasn't been updated for a very long time. Yeah. But I think you made a good point. I don't think we were live yet when you talked about this.
No, we were not. No.
So that SendGrid plugin, even though it's been outdated for a long time, what did you say? It's basically just a direction
It's an
tool,
API
right?
connection. So it's basically something to tell WordPress how to connect to SendGrid. So in all honesty, doesn't need a lot of updating.
It doesn't need updating.
It just creates a connection. That's all what it does. It creates a connection and authenticates the user so that SendGrid knows it's you. And that's it. But I was joking about it, and I said, like, you know what, just go make the title bold and call it version 2. Because when you look and you want to download a plugin that hasn't been updated in 2 years, it looks bad.
Right. Yeah. So hopefully the SendGrid plugin folks hear this. So that's good. So, okay. Talked about SendGrid, talked about the plugin you recommend for SMTP. And again, you could use that and have the settings with Gmail or whatever to have it send from there. Or you could use SendGrid along with that, or vice versa. Like right now, I'm not using the SMTP Postman or the mailer log. I'm just using SendGrid. So, and it's working fine. Yeah. We got it working before this call. We've worked it out. But I should say too, if anyone's curious, the issue I had with mine, because my email wasn't down for long, it just, what I had done was I had kind of pulled a rookie mistake and changed my email because I wanted to have my messages come from a different email at my website. And that threw everything off. That must have triggered the filters or something to say that, the email changed, because then I changed it back. I was like, actually, shoot, no, I don't want to do that. I changed it back, and that's when they started bouncing. So we just went into SendGrid, made sure that the email that all those messages should be coming to is, in fact, they can get through and it's not bouncing. And that was it. That's all I had to do. So there's another good life lesson. Don't change your emails when it comes to like WooCommerce orders and stuff.
We're talking about the from part, like
the from. Yep.
That like field where you say it's coming from.
Yeah, from. So what email is this coming from the website? Because like you said, you had WordPress at Human Talent CA or whatever. Well, that's not a real email. You could actually you could put any email you want in there. Which that actually talk about a segue.
Good, that's a bit spammy.
Yeah. One question I had for you, though, was what should those email addresses be for outgoing? Do a lot of platforms look at emails like WordPress at website, or sales, or info at, or should it be a name? Like what's your take on that?
I would say for combating spam and for making sure that everything is good, it doesn't matter what the email address is as long as it's an actual mailbox.
Okay.
So that it does receive as well. Maybe because many people do no reply or do not reply at domain.com. Right. If you want to do that, fine. but do have a mailbox that is called do not reply at yourdomain.com. So that it doesn't look like an email that doesn't exist, that doesn't receive anything back, and then it will look spammy.
Gotcha.
And if it's I still don't understand why people use do not reply. It's a very corporate-y thing. It's like, and then you get something there that says this email box or this mailbox is not monitored. Please don't reply. And it's like, okay, but what if I do want to contact you? What do I do? Like, why can't I just hit respond and type an email to you? What's wrong with that? Right? So I'm not a big fan of the do not reply at something.com. And I like, when I get your newsletter, Josh, or anything that you're doing, it's your actual email. Like I can just respond. And in many cases I did. Like, if you like whatever I read in your newsletter reminded me of something and I wanted to ask you a question, I would just hit reply.
Yeah.
So just make sure you're using the from email address is an actual existing mailbox on your email system. That's all.
That's great.
Call it whatever, sales, info, whatever you like.
But as long as it's real. As long as it's real. That's awesome. That's great. Man, I'm looking at my list of questions and stuff, and I feel like we've actually covered pretty much everything. I want to recap and maybe... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I want to address the elephant in the room before we go. People thinking that if I move to G Suite, that's too expensive or too complicated or think about... Because again, like email isn't sexy. We said that in the beginning. It's like we use it all the time. It's very important, but it's not sexy and it's not, colorful and stuff like that. Yeah. So people don't think about it a lot.
Amr, can I save this for your final thought? Because I had a couple more questions, but I think this might be like the perfect final thought.
Yeah.
I totally meant to ask this earlier, but can we just make the differentiation for everyone between IMAP and POP? Because that's a big deal, particularly when it comes to someone moving their email. So somebody might hear this and say, okay, I'm on my server, I'm sold, I want to move to G Suite or Microsoft, but then here comes the kicker. How do I move my email? I want to make sure I don't lose stuff. And then a lot of people don't know IMAP versus POP. So can you kind of explain that?
So POP is post office protocol. It's like a post office. So what happens, all the email goes to the post office. It stays there in the post office until you check your email. So again, think real life scenarios, not internet. You've got a PO box somewhere, mail comes into your PO box, you have a key, you go open, you take your email and you get away. Now your PO box, the POP, is empty. There's nothing there, right? Because you took your mail already. Mm-hmm, yeah. So now your mail is with you, right? It's saved in your Outlook or whatever mail application you're using on your computer to check your email. But the mailbox is completely empty. So if you're only using POP and you're going to migrate your email from your hosting to Gmail, it makes migration a little bit easier because your mailbox is kind of empty. Like there's nothing, there are no old messages to move, right?
Or duplicated, right? Or duplicated messages.
The problem is if you lost that, like if you use POP and then your computer stops working, and there's a little checkbox when you do the setup that says leave messages on server.
Yes.
Right? So if that's ticked, your old messages are still on the server, that's good. We can find them and move them for you.
Do you remember? I think it was maybe the first project we collaborated on. I don't want to say the client's name or anything, but when we had that big issue because we moved their email.
When we ended up moving message by message. Yes, I can't remember the name of the client. I remember the experience.
This may have been before that. One of them had everything with POP, but they didn't have the backup or they didn't have it saved elsewhere. And then when we changed the email, they lost everything. And
because there's nothing there. Like you use POP, you took your mail to your house.
Yeah.
If you lost it in your house, we can't get it for you. There's nothing on the server, right? Like everything, Josh, there are pros and cons. If you want to leave messages on server, you're going to run out of storage soon because everything, even your old mail and your sent messages is on the server. But the beauty of it, that it's like it's in the cloud. So if your machine stops working, you change your phone or your computer, everything is still on the server.
Yeah, that was the beauty.
Yeah.
So like we'll transition to IMAP here because my email is set up with IMAP. So when I got a new computer last year, I just set up my new email on my new computer, and then once I got it integrated and had all the settings, it was just it just upload all the emails.
IMAP is, I'm not gonna say it's better. I mean, I've always kind of preferred POP because it keeps the server clean. IMAP by default is Internet Message Access Protocol. So it gives you access to the message. So the message doesn't go anywhere. It arrives in the it arrives to the server. So when I send you an email, Josh, my email goes to your mail server, stays there. And then when you use IMAP, you're only reading it.
I'm just seeing it. Yeah.
You're just seeing it.
So if I
delete
everything
it, stays there by default.
When I delete it in my email client, it's still on the server. It's still... Or actually, no, it would delete it on there
not
too,
really,
right?
no. I mean, because in the settings, again, there's a little checkbox that says empty trash from the server too. So if I delete it from here, it deletes it from the server.
Yeah.
IMAP is actually a little bit faster because you're working straight on the server. It doesn't go to a post office first, then comes to you. You're actually linked to the server live.
Yeah.
So when you delete stuff, it deletes from the server unless you tell it not to.
Gotcha. Yep. I'm just the setup. It's making everything is. It's like everything is coming full circle, and it's all becoming clear to me now when I think about setting up email and what that meant. So that's a great differentiation between POP and IMAP. And again, you mentioned there's pros and cons. I like the IMAP version, but there's a lot of pros.
Stays. So
there's a lot of pros to having POP. Yeah.
You have to have ample storage. And, the other thing is, and which is something that I tell my kids not to do, because I think, people who are younger than like 20 years of age now don't know that, but email protocols, IMAP, SMTP, and POP were not made to share large files. They were made originally to share text and maybe with a document attachment or a photo attachment. But I've seen my kids trying to send a school project, which is a video. They want to send it by email, and of course it takes 3 days. It stays there. It doesn't go.
Or the client that's like, I have 100 images, but I couldn't send them all in the email, so I'm just going to send you one at a time.
Exactly. And why don't you just upload this to the
right? Use Dropbox,
OneDrive or Dropbox or whatever, and then share the link with me.
Yes. Yeah.
So email was not made for that, and this is important for web designers. You will sometimes get clients who want to allow website users to send an attachment via the form. While it makes a lot of sense, like, I don't know, if you're a clinic and you want people to sign a disclaimer or something, then upload it as part of the questionnaire that they, for the new patient intake or whatever. Okay, it's a small attachment, it's a PDF, but don't think about one person. Think about 1,000 people filling this. What's going to happen now?
It's interesting. I was thinking back to a lot of my clients who were like business that had locations with several workers there. They were often always POP because it seemed like when a worker would go there to their cubicle, that's where that email was. Like they would, I'm sure they had a backup of it or whatever, but that seemed to be the case, to where it seems like more entrepreneurs and your average business owner who's working remotely is probably going to have IMAP, especially if we're using a lot of different devices. At one point I was using 3 all the time. So I just wanted to make sure I could, see the message instead of having it downloaded.
IMAP is beautiful as well because its device, it's kind of the progress. So let's say you saw a message on your phone and you read it, right? If you go to your computer, it shows as read already, like it knows the progress. It knows whether you saw it or you didn't. POP is a little different because once you get it and it empties the mailbox unless you leave it on server. If you do leave it on server, the next time you open it from another device, it's unread. POP doesn't know the progress, doesn't know whether you saw it or not. If it's on the server, it means it's going to give it to you again.
Okay. Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah. And it really, there it is. There's the pros and cons.
IMAP is a little slower though.
Yeah, it is a little slower. So yeah. Well,
if you have so many messages, it will take
a while.
Especially if you move, like if you change your device. It has to, synchronize with the server, and then you're going to be waiting for a couple of hours until it does all your thousands of messages.
Yeah, that's a good heads up for anyone who's setting up email on a new device or something. Well, man, Amr, we've covered a lot in less than an hour. We talked about, and I want to get your final thought in here. We talked about what email is, kind of let's take a trip back to the late 80s, early 90s. That was kind of fun. What is email deliverability? We talked about the issues with WordPress and what's going on there. We talked about how important it is to have your email off of your web server and have it on Gmail or Microsoft. Talked about what VPS is versus VPN, spam filters. We talked a little bit about Gmail versus G Suite or Microsoft 360. SMTP, we covered that pretty well as far as what that is on WordPress and why you need to you have to have that for messages to get through. Yeah. Some good tools, which I'll list below in the show notes for everyone. I will have those linked. Talked a little bit about whitelisting and what that means and how you can adjust that if you have a lot of messages that go to your spam that you don't want to go to spam. Talked about the actual email addresses that should be on a form that are coming to you, that are like, from WordPress forums to you, and then also having those in a real mailbox, and then POP versus IMAP. So we covered a lot of good stuff. And just real quick, your recommendation before we get to your final thought: get email off web server, get it to G Suite, Microsoft, or Microsoft 360. Is it Microsoft 365 or 360?
Yeah, they removed the word Office. It used to be called Office 365 or something. Now it became Microsoft 365.
Okay. What was Microsoft 360? Was that something different?
I think it always had the 5, but I'm not sure. Unless the older version was called 360 and then they added the 5.
It was probably 365. I wouldn't trust
Microsoft. They'll build it and fix it later.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
I wouldn't trust myself to say that right. So yeah, it must have been Microsoft 365. So
love you guys at Microsoft.
If anyone heard me say 360, I'm sure it was 365. Any case, do that. Use an SMT plugin, and we'll again mention the one. I'll link the one that Amr mentioned. Or you could also use SendGrid, which is still what I'm doing. I'm just using SendGrid, and I have all set up in there. You can actually use both, or you can use a mix, depending on what you want to do. And then, more importantly than anything, with that email that is sending from WordPress to your email and to your customers, make sure it is a real email with a real inbox. Is there any final recommendations that you would say?
I forgot to mention one thing that you just reminded me of it now. SendGrid, and it's only happened with SendGrid, cannot send to the same email that is the from email.
Oh, meaning, so if I did from Jimbo
from
at his
Josh
website,
to Josh,
you
won't get anything. So like on yours, it comes from Hey, and it goes to Josh. That works. But if it was coming from Josh and going to Josh, SendGrid would just discard it. I don't know why, but like maybe they see this again as spam.
I could see that. Yeah, if it's going from the same mailbox to another mailbox, it probably practically that would be weird if you just think about.
So when you set it up on your WordPress, don't put the email where you want to receive the messages as the one from.
Beautiful. Yeah. So So if it's just going to your name at yourwebsite.com, don't make it send from your name at yourwebsite.com.
Exactly.
Have it come from info or something, or I guess you could put anything there as long as it's a real mailbox, right?
So email isn't sexy, isn't colorful. It's old and, but old is gold. It's very important. It's very important specifically if you have a business. We rely on these emails and notifications. We communicate with our customers and prospect customers all the time via email. And believe it or not, like even when you meet someone on LinkedIn, once you get to know each other a little bit, usually you exchange emails and you start taking the conversation on email rather than LinkedIn. So,
oh, dude, email's coming back. It's already back. Like it's cool again. It's kind of like how like mom jeans are in right now. I talk about this because just my wife, we've been joking about how she's loving it. She's loving the mom jeans. And I'm like, it's like early 90s are coming back, even with email. Email used to be so uncool 10 years ago. And then all of a sudden everyone's actually email is still the most important thing because they may not always be on Facebook, or they may change platforms, or you can't even for sure reach everybody on your Facebook feed. So yeah, email is back. It's huge. And I think your final thought you were alluding to earlier, Amr, was it's worth the investment, right? Would you say?
Yes.
And look, you don't work for Gmail or something. You're not, this isn't like, you're just laying it out there.
There are some tricks. Let me give you a quick example. When we say it's $5 per user per mailbox per month, right? Or per mailbox per month. You can have an alias. So like,
if that's what I have. I have like 6 emails that all go to my main email.
You're just paying for one mailbox, but then you have 5, 6 different names that feed into that mailbox, and you don't have to pay per alias. It's just one mailbox. There's another one called Zoho that I've used at some point, and I continue to use on some of the websites that are not my main ones. And I think it's about $20 or $18 for the whole year. And that's also as good as Gmail and Microsoft. They do have a free version, but it has like they add their own, it's like ad at the bottom. You don't want that. But if you're using it for testing purpose, for example, just you're building a website for somebody, you don't yet have details on what they're using, whether they have a G Suite or whatever. Just go for a Zoho free one, create a new account, and use it for testing, and then once you figure out what they're using, you can change your settings on the form. Beautiful. Or on the website.
On the website, yeah. Awesome, Amr. Man, I'm good. I'm good on email now. I want to do something not email related after this. This has been great though, man. Man, thank you so much for dishing out the expertise. This will give us a lot of resources to dive into, and I might even make a little guide based off of this conversation to help everybody understand what the heck is going on with email. So this has been awesome, man. Thank you so much for your advice and your time today, Amr. And man, for being the dude, you're continuing to crush it. I would just want to remind everyone, check Amr out if you have questions with this stuff. He is the guy to turn to. I can say that very confidently after working with you the past few years. So, man, thanks so much, Amr. Where would you like everybody to go to find you online?
Humantalents.ca. It's one word. Humantalents, one word. .ca. Remember, Canadian.
Yeah. Not California.
Yeah. Not California. CA. Oh yeah, of course, California. CA.
Yeah. Right.
It's warmer. It's way warmer than Vancouver, man.
Well, we got snow out here right now, man. We've got it pretty good here in Ohio. So
yeah.
Although by the time this comes out, it'll probably early spring.
The East has been battered nowadays.
Yeah. Well, Amr, awesome, man. Thanks so much.
Always good to be here with you, Josh.
Yeah, man. I have LinkedIn. I'll have everything linked in the show notes. I'll link to your podcast too. You've got a sweet podcast going on right now, so I'll link to that. You got a nice little video show going on, so I'll link to that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, and I do have a tutorial as well that I have shared with the club. Mm-hmm. It explains the DNS, like what is a DNS record, and that will actually make people understand a little bit more. How can you have your website somewhere and your email somewhere else? Because It depends on the DNS records.
Can you
I'll send you the link so that you
send me the link. I'll make sure we have that in the show notes as well for everybody. Yeah, because I remember seeing that. It's a great resource. I didn't save it. Shame on me. I need to save that. Yeah, send that over.
No problem. Send it again.
Awesome, Amr. We'll talk soon, man.
Thanks, Josh.
Hey guys and gals, just wanted to pop in with a couple things before you head out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this podcast. I would love to hear your feedback, and it will also help other web designers find the show. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode. Just go to joshhall.co, click on podcasts, and search this episode number, and you'll find all the links, descriptions, and resources we talked about. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, and you'll be notified when the next episode is live. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys on the next episode.